Good evening, and thank you for coming. At the outset, I would like to make a note with much sadness of the passing of Shyam Benegal. Shyam was to us a family friend of long standing, and he was also, for the last 20 or so years, a much valued member of the council, the equivalent of our governing body, of the Netaji Research Bureau. As you know, among his rich body of work, starting in the 1970s, I've been a Benegal fan myself for over 40 years of his films. Among that body of work is a biopic of Netaji Subhash Bose, parts of which were shot in this very house, in the preserved rooms upstairs, in the verandas, on the driveway, and so on. Shyam Benegal, about 20 years ago, at the time he made that movie, delivered the annual Netaji oration of Netaji Research Bureau in our big space at the back on Netaji's birth anniversary on the 23rd of January. And he was also the recipient of Netaji Research Bureau's Netaji Award around the same time. We deeply mourn Shyam Benegal's passing on behalf of Netaji Research Bureau, and as we all know, he will live on through the priceless work he produced over a lifetime as a filmmaker. This is Krishna Bose's 94th birth anniversary. As most of you know, in the past few years, we have observed her birth anniversary with a commemorative lecture in her honor. The inaugural Krishna Bose lecture was delivered by Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak 4 years ago exactly, in December 2020, who braved the pandemic to come all the way from New York and speak in the Netaji Pavilion at the back. Subsequently, we've had the distinguished Indian diplomats, Nirupama Rao and Ronen Sen, both of whom became personal friends of Krishna Bose's after working with her during her innings in politics when she was the chairperson for 5 years of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. And last January, we had the 4th Krishna Bose lecture delivered by my former LSE colleague and good friend, a distinguished historian of modern Russia, Dominic Lieven, who spoke in the Netaji Pavilion on Russia and Ukraine, past, present, and future. This year, we decided to commemorate her birth anniversary a bit differently with this bespoke art exhibition, which we are opening today, and which will run here until and through Republic Day, Sunday, the 26th of January, 2025. I want to give you an idea of why it is rather befitting to observe Krishna Bose's birth anniversary through an exhibition of modern art. Most of you are familiar with her varied interests and accomplishments, but some of you may not know that she was a virtually lifelong connoisseur of modern art. And not just the modern art of Bengal and of India, she was also a connoisseur of modern art in its European and North American forms. And this appreciation of modern art was rooted in her childhood. So I'm going to do a few short readings from this book Lost Addresses, a memoir of India, 1934 to 1955. It is Krishna Bose's autobiography of her early life. It was published by Ananda Publishers in the original Bengali in 2014 as Harano Thikana, and I translated it into English and was published in 2015 as Lost Addresses by Niyogi Books in Delhi. Sometime at the end of 1943 or the beginning of 1944, in a famine-racked Calcutta and Bengal, Krishna Bose, and she was an only child, Krishna Bose and her parents, Charusi Chaudhuri and Chaya Devi Chaudhurani, moved from a bungalow-like residence in Dover Lane to a third-floor, huge and airy flat on Rashbihari Avenue. The address is 190 Rashbihari Avenue. So Krishna Bose had just turned 13 when this move from Dover Lane to Rashbihari Avenue took place. And this is a short excerpt from the chapter of a memoir titled Rashbihari Avenue. Although our Rashbihari Avenue flat, unlike the Dover Lane bungalow, lacked its own green space, we gained a cultural environment that was perhaps the richest of any city in India at the time. In the 1940s, the part of South Calcutta centered on Rashbihari Avenue was like a colony of artists, writers, and scholars. On Hindustan Park, the poet couple Narendra Deb and Radharani Devi lived in their house Bhalobasha. At 202 Rashbihari Avenue, almost next door neighbors, was Kobita Bhavan, the residence of another celebrated writer couple, Buddhadev Bose and his wife Pratibha Bose. The sculptor Pradosh Dasgupta, who later became curator of the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi and is also the sculptor of the Netaji statue that stands on the Maidan in Calcutta, lived nearby on Sardar Shankar Road with his wife Kamala, who was from Kerala. He set up his studio on the ground floor of our building, 190 Rashbihari Avenue. The music composer and singer Shochinde Bormon and his wife Meera would often be seen walking on Rashbihari Avenue. They lived on a narrow street just off the avenue, almost opposite us. This was just before Shochinde Bormon moved to Bombay. Gopal Ghosh, an innovative painter of landscapes, also lived in the neighborhood. In 1943, Gopal Ghosh, Pradosh Dasgupta, and a few others had founded the so-called Calcutta Group, India's first collective of modernist artists. Gopal and Pradosh, young men at the time, became very attached to my father, Charuchandra Chaudhuri, whom they addressed as Charuda. They constantly dropped in at our flat. They were in and out. I remember father saying about Gopal Ghosh, a genius, but he drinks way too much. Also close by, on Bundle Road in the Lakes area, lived Atul Bose, an eminent portrait painter. He was like the Chaudhuris, of East Bengal origin, born in fact in the same district as the Chaudhuri family is from, Bensing. We used to visit his house on Bundle Road often. Around this time, I also met Jamini Roy for the first time. One of Abanindranath Tagore's first pupils. He was inspired by European Impressionism in his early career, as we all know, but then moved to an original style, the famous style based on the folk and tribal arts of Bengal, including the Kalighat pot tradition. On that first occasion, as a girl, I accompanied father to his studio in Shambhajar in North Calcutta. Later, he became our neighbor when he built a residence-cum-studio on Baligunj Place, close to Rashbihari Avenue. On Hindustan Park was Shudharma, the residence of Shuniti Kumar Chattopadhyay. It was only when I became an adult that I realized what an extraordinary collection of people formed our milieu at Rashbihari Avenue. So that's the first brief reading. Now flash forward by about 10 years. So Krishna Bose has grown up. She has, I think, just completed her MA in English at Calcutta University. She had the privilege, which she cherished all her life, of studying among many other professors with Professor Taruknath Sen, who was her personal favorite. I managed to continue my freelance writing alongside the classes and the hectic social life. I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter is titled At University, that I had developed an interest in modern art. I sent an article titled Adhunik Chitrakola, Modern Art, to Desh, the leading Bengali magazine of literature and criticism. Sagormoy Ghosh, the editor, liked it, and it was published. Greatly encouraged, I sent a follow-up piece. Those were my first two published articles in Bengali. I have included both of those articles in this anthology of Krishna Bose's essays and articles published over 70 years, 1951 to 2020. As you can see, Krishna Bosu Prabandha Sangraho, 1951 থেকে 2020, published by Ananda Publishers 3 years ago in autumn 2021. It has about 107 articles and essays that she wrote over 7 decades on a wide range of subjects, but we do have both of those Bengali articles. The first one was published in 1954 in Desh. She was just 23 years old, and Desh is quite a highbrow journal, prestigious and difficult to get published in. It was published as Arter Adhunik Dhara, and the second follow-up piece she mentions is Charukola Pradarshani Prashange, about the exhibition. And in 1960, shortly after her return from the United States, she published a third article, which is also here, American Arter Adhunik Dhara, where she masterfully surveys 20th century American art from the beginnings in the early 20th century, Edward Hopper in the 1920s, through Jackson Pollock and abstract expressionism in the 1940s and 1950s. Though I did not know it at the time, it was the beginning of a long relationship with Sagormoy Ghosh. Much later, 2 of my books on Netaji's life were serialized in Desh and then published as books, Itihasher Shandhane, In Search of History, in the early 1970s, on Netaji in Europe during the 1930s and early 1940s, and a decade later, in the early 1980s, Choronere Khatobo, In His Footsteps, on Netaji in Southeast Asia during World War II. Meanwhile, a new English evening paper called Freelance appeared in Calcutta, mid-1950s. Its editors asked me to cover the city's art exhibitions for them. My pieces were anonymous by our art critic. At that point, I was set on a career as an art critic. Father's library, Charuchandra Chaudhuri was a bibliophile of great sophistication. Father's personal library in the Rashbihari Avenue flat, which we have inherited, it is in our 90 Sarat Bose Road home now, except his law books, which he sold off at some point. Father's personal library was a most useful resource for building up my knowledge. Then all of a sudden, I got an offer to be a film critic as well. Chanchal Sarkar, a distant maternal uncle, returned from studies in England and joined the editorial staff of The Statesman. he offered me the vacant position of the paper's film critic. It was really tempting. The Statesman was one of India's most reputable newspapers at the time. But after consideration, I said no. I just didn't have the time to watch a movie most days of the week. So I stayed with art criticism. The leading artist Paritosh Sen, a founding member of the Calcutta group in the 1940s, with Gopal Ghosh and others, liked my piece on one of his exhibitions and wrote a nice letter to the editor of this magazine called Freelance. He referred to me as he. Uncle Nirod, this is Ma's Mejo Kaka, Nirod C. Chaudhary. Uncle Nirod mentioned in one of his letters from Delhi, he lived in Delhi at the time with his family, that he was receiving free copies of a new evening daily being published in Calcutta. He said he found it ordinary, but the art critic's pieces were not bad. I was elated and informed him of the writer's identity. He wrote in his next letter that he was impressed with how well I had picked up French. One of my pieces had had a long quotation in that language. At the time, Obuni C. Banerjee was a well-known figure in the art world of Calcutta. He invited me to give a public lecture on modern art. Initially, the venue of the lecture was supposed to be Netaji Bhawan on Elgin Road, but that didn't work out for some reason. So I gave the first public lecture of my life at the YMCA Hall on Chorungi. It went well. I gave a talk using slides. Shoben Tagore, the communist intellectual and a member of the Tagore family, was among the audience. At the end of the talk, the film critic Chidananda Dasgupta took a copy of my lecture. He used to work then for the daily Amritobajar Potrika. The text was published in the paper the next day. And the last and shortest reading, this is of Krishna Bose's wedding with Shishir Bose in December 1955. The exact date is 9th December 1955. And the wedding ceremony was held in the sprawling compound of Tripura Bhavan or Tripura House on South Calcutta's Baliganj Circular Road. The wedding invitation was simple, the card, which has been reproduced in this, along with other illustrations in this book. It's a beautiful card, I have to say. The wedding invitation card was simple, decorated with Alpona motifs taken from the work of Abanindranath Tagore. The guests were an eclectic collection. There were politicians and administrators whom father knew through work. At the time, Charusi Chaudhary was for many years the secretary of the West Bengal Legislative Assembly. That's why he knew politicians and administrators. Then there were his friends from the world of culture. Of course, father's close friend, Phonibhushan Chakraborty, Ma called him Phoni Kaka and we called him Phoni Dadu, who had seen me grow up since early childhood, was present. He was then the Chief Justice of the Calcutta High Court. The linguist Shuniti Kumar Chatterjee arrived, bearing as a gift a copy of the Mahabharat. Narendra Deb and Radharani Devi brought copies of their own books as gifts. Another family friend and neighbor, the hard-drinking artist Gopal Ghosh, was hard at work decorating the area where the wedding rituals would take place in Alpona style. Atul Bose, the portrait specialist, that is Krishna Bose by Atul Bose over there. This is Subhash Chandra Bose by Atul Bose over here. Atul Bose, the portrait specialist, arrived bearing a special gift, a painting by Jamini Roy, which of course we have in our current residence. I'll end by reading out to you, it's not a very long review. We are most grateful to our friend, Professor Saranindranath Tagore, member of Netaji Research Bureau, for lending us, or as they say in American, loaning us these priceless, unseen classics from the personal family collection owned by him and his spouse, Meeta Tagore. Meeta, unfortunately, is a little indisposed and she couldn't come today. She, by the way, happens to be the daughter of another famous person, the sitarist Nikhil Banerjee. And Saranindranath, of course, is the great-grandson of Abanindranath Tagore. And the boy who's directly behind Saranindranath is his grandfather, whom he calls Dadaiya, Alokendranath Tagore, the oldest son of Abanindranath Tagore. On April 9th, 1955, a review headlined "The Art of Abanindranath Tagore, Fine Exhibition of A.N. Tagore's Works," was published in The Statesman, April 1955. The byline by our art critic, Krishna Bose, all of 24 years old at the time, still not married, so something of a free bird. Just 2 months ago, this critic wrote in these columns, so she was a frequent contributor to The Statesman. Everybody who knows anything about the recent history of Indian art knows that the impulse due to the work of Abanindranath Tagore has been the most pervasive and creative of all influences. Most of the eminent artists have nourished their imagination on his. Yet, the works of some who follow his methods suffer from conditions of ritual rigidity, and the splendor that is created is gloomy and elusive in character. That he is damned good to steal from has been discovered, but without a proper understanding of the true context of his ideas and tendencies, some of his disciples have fallen into a mannerism. One of the reasons for the recent deterioration of Indian-style paintings is that the painters are preoccupied with conventional forms and emasculate compositions, which have very little conviction. So quite critical, even harsh. This exhibition of about 400 works of the master, now being held at the Indian Museum by Rabindra Bharati, helps us to understand the true context of his ideas and gives the lie to those who think or say that Indian-style paintings up and down the line have always been ailing or in poor health. No one can walk around the exhibition, which is the largest and most comprehensive collection of his works ever to be publicly displayed, without having enthusiasm renewed and faith restored. Early trading. Like most of the art students of his time, Abanindranath in his young days tried his hand at the European technique. This is reflected in these paintings because these are early Abanindranaths, all done in the first decade of the 20th century. This early trading counted for much in the development of his art. He owed a great deal to E.B. Havell, the great Englishman, who through his writings made us aware of the vast richness of Indian art and the true significance of its ideals. The turning point of Abanindranath's career came when Havell showed him some masterpieces of Rajput and Mughal paintings, which inspired him to begin his famous series of Radha-Krishna pictures. Havell found in him a painter of considerable power, whose work showed indications of a blending of Eastern and Western thought. He credited Abanindranath with giving a true interpretation of the Indian tradition to us. The two worked together, Abanindranath and Havell, for the revival of old Indian art hidden in the caves of Ajanta and Ellora, the Pahari miniatures, and much else, and they also studied Japanese and Chinese paintings. Among those who strongly supported this movement for the renaissance of national art was Dr. Ananda Kumaraswamy. Abanindranath Tagore soon became the acknowledged leader of this new movement of painting, which became a great cultural manifestation, both artistic and critical, and signified the artist's dissatisfaction with the country's position as a mere consumer of other people's cultural products. Abanindranath's place in modern Indian art is to be determined on this background, and he is to be hailed for turning his back on alien influences and for saving Indian art from the inanities of Ravi Verma. Technique. The childlike simplicity, directness, and curiosity of his mind sometimes conceal from us the importance of his contribution to the artistic tradition. His technique of using watercolor and wash, known as Abanindranath's wash, and the special treatment of opaque and transparent colors alternately for wash are often deceptive. The use of color, particularly the pigeon blue, is sometimes awkward, but they give some of his pictures the peculiar quality of a strong decorative arabesque and also exact descriptive draftsmanship. An immense number of curious and delightful things he calls to our mind by a precise description. His decorative surface design includes all the different kinds of trees, flowers, and fruits, some common, others rarer and more exotic, and different kinds of birds and animals, and all the curious masks, of course, Abanindranath's masks. His freakish and enjoyable fancy sometimes tends to mislead us in our judgment of him as an artist, since he looks for inspiration chiefly to mythology, anecdotes, ancient history, and literature. There is no suggestion of inner conflict or tragedy. The subdued light and shade dull tonalities, while flat wash and color surfaces create a sense of repose. Every possibility of a humorous theme arrests his attention and inspires him with invention, each more fantastically delightful. With his mind so full of innocent wonder at the curiosities of nature, he imparts a soft rhythm and poetic meaning to romantic landscapes and tender animal studies alike. In views of Puri, the Mussoorie, Ranchi, Deoghar, Darjeeling, and Shahjadpur series, the pigeon, hittopades, animal, and playmates series, and in the shadow pictures, he tends to pass from one separately observed fact to another without being insensitive to the universal aspects of things as well as their interrelations. In the large number of masks, old, young, melancholy, defiant, comic, he achieves an imaginative grasp of the whole volume of the head and its position in space. The final stage. The Arabian Nights series, which is one of the great attractions of this exhibition, marked the final stage of Abanindranath Tagore's creative life. Here he regains, with great success, the decorative quality of his paintings. There is a marked influence of both Persian miniatures and Rajput paintings. The Kavi Kankang Chandi and Krishna Mongol series charm and amuse by their naive vigor. Some of Abanindranath's early and familiar works, however, fail to develop a pictorial idiom and are full of worn clichés. If his disciples mistake these for rich native idiom, the fault is theirs, because Abanindranath himself in his later works lived them down. The modeling in the tiny portrait of Ananda Kumaraswamy shows, however, proud simplicity, absolute economy, and continuity of rhythm. The exhibition contains other works of this versatile genius, his literary works, books on aesthetics and art, his books for children, book cover designs, postcard sketches, and excellent illustrations of the alphabet. It also includes toys for little children, the making of which from small stones, pebbles, and broken twigs was Abanindranath's main hobby in the last few years of his life. The beauty of the exhibition has been enhanced by the inclusion of 2 head studies of Abanindranath Tagore done by Ramkinkar and Shunil Pal. So that's the review. I will now invite Saranindranath Tagore to speak briefly to you about these priceless works he has loaned us from his personal collection. And Sugata Bose will then speak briefly about the other exhibits which we have put on display. Let me just very briefly say, before I turn the podium over to Saranindranath, you'll of course get a chance to see this at very close range once we wrap up soon enough. Here is an impromptu portrait of Shishir Bose done by Chintamani Kar in 1978. We used to visit Chintamani Kar's home-come studio in the Narendrapur area, in the southern suburbs, in the winter of 1977-78, when Chintamani Kar was working on a painting of Netaji Bhawans to be installed in the Central Hall of the Indian Parliament in New Delhi, which finally happened 30 years after India's independence. Chintamani Kar really called on Baba, Dr. Shishir Bose, for advice and assistance as he created the Central Hall painting of Netaji. And one day, Baba was sitting for him, and he was, there's a certain familial resemblance. And he said to Baba that, let me do a kind of an impromptu portrait of you. And this is displayed here. Over there, as I mentioned already, is Krishna Bose by Atul Bose from about 1953, when Mama was a medical student. And you can see why Atul Bose was a friend of the family. And I don't need to say anything more. And there are a couple of other items in the middle, and Sugata Bose will speak to this in greater detail, is a portrait of Dr. Shishir Bose made in 1959 by an American portraitist called Frank C. Bensing, a very well-known artist, and he will tell you how that happened. That's an interesting story in itself. And the final one on this wall is a profile charcoal sketch, I think it's called, of Subhash Chandra Bose that Shishir Bose made of his uncle in the year 1934. At that time, Shishir Bose, who was in his early teens, 13 or perhaps just about 14, was learning sketching and drawing from a teacher called Harendranath Tagore, who was himself an artist of considerable standing. If you go upstairs to our Sarat Bose room in the Netaji Museum on the first floor, you will see wonderful oil paintings, portraits, toilochitro, jake boli amra, of Netaji's parents, Janakinath Bose and Prabhavati Bose, done by Harendranath Tagore. And we also have very fine portraits of Subhash Chandra Bose and Sharat Chandra Bose, done by Harendranath Tagore. Harendranath Tagore transitioned from being Baba's art teacher to becoming a close friend of the family, trusted lieutenant of Sharat Chandra Bose in the field of politics as well. And much later, he served as the president of Netaji Research Bureau. Now, this charcoal sketch that Baba did as a 13 or 14-year-old is based on a photo of Netaji. Netaji was in Europe, as you know, for almost the whole time, from 1933 to 1936. A portrait of Netaji taken in a studio in Prague, one of his favorite cities in Europe, along with Vienna, in 1933. And I believe Netaji sent it to Bibhabhuti Bose, along with a letter. And Bibhabhuti Bose, Sarat Bose's wife, our grandmother, knew that Baba was learning art, so she gave the photo to Baba and said, why don't you do a sketch on the basis of this? And that's how that particular piece came into being. Okay, once again, thank you for coming. It's brilliant to have you with us this evening to celebrate Krishna Bose's 94th. And now can I invite Saranindranath Tagore to speak for about 5 minutes. I think he wants to speak about Abanindranath.
Namaskar. Let me begin by saying that I'm immensely pleased that this exhibition is being inaugurated to mark the 94th birth anniversary of Krishna Bose, who was, as we all know, an iconic figure in the cultural and political life of Bengal. ওনাকে প্রণাম জানিয়ে শুরু করছি অবনীন্দ্রনাথ সম্বন্ধে কয়েকটা কথা বলবো। I had argued some years ago, precisely I believe it was 2011, at a conference held at Harvard arranged by Sugata Bose, that to designate Abanindranath's art as revivalist or nationalist underestimated the global reach and the cosmopolitan vision of his aesthetic consciousness. In my view, then and now, Abanindranath's lifelong quest was to create an artistic world that would complement his uncle Robika's argument that universal humanism should trump the postures of narrow nationalism. This is a long story at the intersections of philosophy and art history that needs to be told, but cannot be fully rehearsed today. I just want to quote the last few sentences from his great essay, Abanindranath's great essay, Jati o Shilpo, to profile his views on the matter. এটা পাওয়া যাবে বাগেশ্বরী শিল্প প্রবন্ধাবলীতে অন্তর্ভুক্ত। তো উদ্ধৃতিটা হচ্ছে এই, একটা সাহেব সমুদ্রের উপরে সূর্যাস্তকে তাদের বিদেশি সন্ধ্যা বলে বর্ণন করেছিল আমার এক বন্ধুর কাছে। সে হিসেবে আর্টকে বলা যায় ন্যাশনাল, কিন্তু আসলে আর্ট তা নয়। সে পথিক, তার বাসা জাতীয় আগারে নয়, তার পথ জাত দেবতার রথচক্র লাঞ্ছিত বড় রাস্তাও নয়, ছোট গলিও নয়, ঠিক ঠিকানা সব নিশানা হারানো পথে বিস্ময়কর অপূর্ব দর্শন। সে কবিকে বলায়, এবার রবীন্দ্রনাথকে কোট করছেন, উদ্ধৃত করছেন, এটা রবীন্দ্রনাথের 4টে পংক্তি। কোন দেশে যে বাসা তোমার কে জানে ঠিকানা, কোন গানের সুরের পারে তার পথের নাই নিশানা। Here, Abanindranath is clearly telling us that according to him, art cannot be hermetically sealed within nationalist or statist concerns. And by quoting Rabindranath at the end of the essay, he is aligning himself with his poet uncle's endorsement of the philosophical triplet: cosmopolitanism, universalism, and humanism. Framed in this universalist concern, Abanindranath's engagement with Far Eastern, Japanese especially, and Islamic art, Persian especially, and various, almost all strands of India's artistic history is well known, but his conversations with European art is relatively under-discussed. These portraits, in my view, presented in this exhibition, focuses on the Europe-facing conversations of this pioneering Indian painter. To take up just one such theme, I think more themes can be mentioned, but just to take one such theme for your consideration, it seems to me that the portrait of my grandfather, Alokendranath, in the middle, his son, elder son, is informed by the visual conversation the Impressionist painter Renoir had with the great Flemish master Peter Paul Rubens. In such ways, to paraphrase the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, each painter shakes hands with a fraternity of painters spread over a variety of styles. Abanindranath's fraternity was global in its scope and universal in its aesthetic resonance. I'll stop now. Time is short. But before stopping completely, I wish to thank the brothers, Sugata and Sumantra, for arranging this exhibition in this heritage venue so that many can see these paintings that I grew up with. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Saranindranath. We are in your debt. I wonder, would you like to say a word or two about Mukul Dey's Rabindranath? Only if you wish. A portrait made in 1917 by Mukul Dey of Rabindranath Tagore, and it's signed by Tagore in Bengali in his own hand. You can take a look a bit later.
Not much, except that I feel Mukul Dey was a great draftsman, as you can see, and he did multiple portraits of Rabindranath, as you know. This was done in 17, right. And that is Mukul Dey's seal. So I grew up seeing this picture, and it's very impressive, I feel, especially the posture, him looking down. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Professor Sugata Bose to wind up this evening's inauguration ceremony.
Let me say a couple of words more about this wonderful Mukul Dey portrait of Rabindranath Tagore. It is signed by Rabindranath himself, 19th September 1917. Mukul Dey traveled with Rabindranath to Japan and the United States in 1916. And some of you may be familiar with a very well-known portrait of Tagore done by Mukul Dey, which is titled Gurudev Lecturing in America. And that too has Mukul Dey's seal, which you see on this portrait in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, Saranindranath has already told you about the European influences on Abanindranath. It is also quite important to note today his interactions with Japanese art critic Okakura and also Japanese painters Yokoyama Taikan and Hishida Shunso. They had followed Okakura's trail to Kolkata, and it was in 1903 that Okakura would visit the Jorashanko mansion, and it was then that he painted a beautiful canvas, Rashlila, the love play of Radha and Krishna on a full moon night. Abanindranath had removed a European oil painting from the wall of his studio to make space for an Asian work of art to be executed by Taikan. And in my book, Asia After Europe, which was published earlier this year, I have actually described the process through which Taikan did this painting. He was very unsatisfied for a while, even though the painting had almost reached completion. Until one day in October, he arrived in Jorashako and found that the women at home had collected shiuli, the white autumnal flower, and the breeze had blown the flowers all across the room. And so Taikan picked up the shiuli and just scattered the flowers on his canvas. And he was delighted to see that. And then he picked up one shiuli pull and began to apply its white and orange colors. And suddenly, the sky, which already shone with moonlight, also had a rain of flowers. And that is how he felt that the painting had actually reached its sort of climax. Now, when Rabindranath went to Japan in 1916, he was welcomed by all his Japanese friends in Kobe when his ship docked there, the Tosamaru. And among them, of course, was none other than Yokoyama Taikan. And initially, Rabindranath went to Osaka and then to Tokyo. And he lived for a while in Yokoyama Taikan's home near UNO Park, which today houses the wonderful UNO Museum of Art in Tokyo. Mukul Dey was quite young then, and he was absolutely thrilled to meet Yokoyama Taikan and to see the masterpieces of Japanese art. And it was Mukul Dey who, on this visit, organized an exhibition of Bengal school paintings. And it was much appreciated in the Japanese press. So Mukul Dey was constantly with Rabindranath, both in Japan and then in the United States of America. And I think that closeness, that intimacy has been reflected in this wonderful portrait done a year later in 1917. It is a very important year in Rabindranath's life. That was the year when his critical lectures on nationalism were published as a book, Nationalism, by Macmillan. Rabindranath always took with him a formidable team of intellectuals and artists on his overseas voyages. And Mukul Dey was fortunate enough to accompany him in 1916. Later, we know, of course, in 1924, Nandalal Bose went to China and Japan. And on his Java Jatra, Surendranath Kaur had accompanied him. So I hope you will come and take a close look at these wonderful portraits. Mukul Dey's Rabindranath, absolutely, wonderful self-portrait by Abanindranath. That, I think, is a masterpiece, his portrait of his wife, Suhasini Devi, with the green background, and the delightful, portrait of his son, Alokendranath Tagore. I will close by saying a few words about the other paintings. Sumantra has already told you about Atul Bose's portrait of our mother, Krishna Bose, done most probably, we believe, in 1953. And then, of course, we have Atul Bose's portrait of Subhash Chandra Bose, which is part of Netaji Research Bureau's collection. And then there are two portraits of our father, Dr. Shishir Kumar Bose. We used to go to Chintamani Kar's studio and home in Narendrapur, as Sumantra has mentioned. And this was a product of one of those visits. I think part of its charm lies in the fact that it has an unfinished quality. The face, the expression, the hand, the actual details of the context in which this was painted has been written down by Chintamani Kar himself in the bottom right-hand corner of that painting. Now, I was lucky enough to visit the great art museums and galleries of the United States of America with my mother between ages 2 and 4. My mother, of course, has written about all this, not that I remember, those days, but they come to life very vividly through my mother's writings. We used to go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Isabella Gardner Museum, not so far away. But Mama also used to go to the Institute of Contemporary Art, the ICA, in Boston. When we visited New York, she of course went to the Met and the Museum of Modern Art. And in Washington, I was taken by her to the National Gallery of Art. As we were leaving Boston, the doctors at the Boston Children's Hospital, my father had gone to the Harvard Medical School as a Rockefeller Fellow. They decided to give us a farewell party. And this was organized in the home of one of my father's colleagues, Dr. Wittenberg, in Framingham, not too far away from Boston. And Mama has written about it both in English and Bengali. I'll read a little passage from her Bengali account. পৌঁছে দেখলাম বস্টন চিলড্রেন্স মেডিকেল সেন্টারের অনেকেই উপস্থিত। ডক্টর বসুর ডিপার্টমেন্টের তো কেউই বাকি নেই। ওর ডিপার্টমেন্ট ছিল বস্টন শিশু হাসপাতালের সবচাইতে আন্তর্জাতিক ডিপার্টমেন্ট। আমেরিকান সহকর্মীরাও ছাড়াও ছিল জার্মানি, কানাডা, সুইজারল্যান্ড, ইরান, টার্কি আর ভারতবর্ষ তো বটেই। দেন শি রাইটস, হঠাৎ দেখি ডক্টর উইটেনবার্গ পূজার আরতির ঘণ্টার মতো একটা ছোট ঘণ্টা টুংটাং করে বাজিয়ে এঘর ওঘর ঘুরছেন। কি ব্যাপার? ওর একটা বিশেষ ঘোষণা আছে, সবাইকে লাইব্রেরি ঘরে জড়ো হতে বলছেন। সবাই কফির পেয়ালা হাতে লাইব্রেরিতে এলাম। উইটেনবার্গ উঠে দাঁড়িয়ে বক্তৃতার ঢঙে বলতে লাগলেন, কোনো বিদায়ী ছাত্র চলে যাওয়ার আগে ডক্টর নিউহাউসার তার একটা কঠিন পরীক্ষা নেন। সাধারণত একটা জটিল এক্স-রে ফিল্ম দিয়ে রোগ নির্ণয় করতে বলা হয় তাকে। আমাদের বিদায়ী সহকর্মী শিশির বোসের এই পরীক্ষাটা বাকি আছে। চেয়ে দেখি উইটেনবার্গের হাতে একটি হাসপাতালের বড়সড় এক্স-রে ফিল্মের খাম। অন্যদিকে নজরে পড়ল নিউহাউসার একটি চেয়ারে বসে মুচকি হাসছেন। খামটা হঠাৎ আমার দিকে বাড়িয়ে ধরে উইটেনবার্গ বললেন, এ যাত্রা ওর বদলে ওর স্ত্রী এই পরীক্ষাটা দিক। একটা জটিল কেস ওর হাতে দিয়েছি আমি। আমি তো অপ্রস্তুত, এ আবার কি? পরীক্ষা টরীক্ষা শুনলেই আমার হাত পা ঠান্ডা হয়ে যায়। আস্তে খামটা খুলতে বেরিয়ে পড়ল একটা অয়েল পেইন্টিং, আমার স্বামীর পোর্ট্রেট। ফ্র্যাঙ্ক বেনসিং বলে নিউ ইয়র্কের এক পোর্ট্রেট শিল্পীর আঁকা। বেনসিং কিছুকাল আগে বস্টনে এসেছিল নিউহাউসারের একটি পোর্ট্রেট আঁকতে। কর্মরত নিউহাউসারকে নিয়ে ঘিরে বসে আছে তার আন্তর্জাতিক ছাত্রদল। তার একটি অপূর্ব অয়েল পেইন্টিং হাসপাতালের জন্য করেছে সে। এই পোর্ট্রেটটিও সেই সময়কার রচনা। বুঝলাম বস্টনে ওর কর্মস্থল শিশু হাসপাতালের পক্ষে এটা আমাদের বিদায় উপহার। পোর্ট্রেটটা ফিরতে লাগলো সকলের হাতে হাতে। পোর্ট্রেটের সঙ্গে সঙ্গে উইটেনবার্গের দেবার কায়দাটুকুও সকলের তারিফ পেল। সত্যি একটা জটিল কেসই বটে। আপনারা কাছে এসে দেখতে পাবেন, it's a wonderful portrait of Shishir Kumar Bose, 1959, by Frank C. Bensing, who was born in 1893 and trained initially at the Art Institute in Chicago. But later he was based in New York. He lived a long and very productive life. He died in 1983. The Boston elite would typically commission him to come and do various paintings on various occasions. And if you now visit the Boston Children's Hospital and go to the pediatric radiology wing, and Newhouser used to say that our father, Dr. Shishir Kumar Bose, will be the father of pediatric radiology in India, which he did become. You will still see in the Ed Newhouser reading room an absolutely brilliant oil painting of Newhouser and his residents and students. And among them, of course, is Dr. Shishir Kumar Bose. But clearly he also did just a single portrait of this Indian visitor to Boston in 1959. We are delighted to have you all here, and we invite you warmly, those of you who are sitting right at the back, to come up and take a closer look at these wonderful portraits, virtually unseen in public in the past. And once you have savored the works of art, please also come outside and join us for some coffee and snacks. Jai Hind.
So please do take your time to inspect these wonderful portraits at close range and take photographs as you please. But don't go away without sharing a cup of coffee with us. And along with coffee, since it's a birthday party, we have hot shingara and Nolingurer kachagolla. Okay? So do partake before you leave. Thank you once again for coming.